So here we are then with part 8 of the old eLiquid log database thing. Yeah, still got a cold, but well, onwards. Now, where we left off is the recipe form with the sort of embedded subform of the ingredients was kind of almost finished to a point where it was usable, apart from the fact that there was one last thing to be done. And that was that we needed to make a drop down to select ingredients rather than having to remember to type them in exactly correctly every time, which would never happen. So we want a drop down so that we can just click the button, have a look for the ingredient we want, select it, job done. So as that is pretty much the same as we've done in the new ingredient form for, just creating a drop down based on a query to list all the ingredients, I have just gone ahead and done it, and there it is there. So that replaces what used to be here, which was just a normal text box. It's now a drop down, and it's obviously tied to the correct part of the table, the recipe ingredient name, and it has this query to get the source, which is simply 2 columns. It could just be 1 column, to be honest, but this is the way that Access does it if you use the wizard. So yeah, well, we just left it. The first column is the ingredient name. The second column is also the ingredient name. That basically just means that the displayed text and the value that's used in the background will both be ingredient name, and we're sorting it ascending. And if we close this form and save the changes and open up the full recipe form in normal entry mode, you'll see that down here we now have a drop down. I've deleted some of the dodgy recipes that we added yesterday, so let's add something a little bit more usable. Let's just call it vanilla custard. We'll put in 0.3 there. We'll make it a 70-30 mix, and yeah, test recipe will do for the notes. And we just need to pick out our ingredients. So let's put in, let's say, vanilla custard, B1. Let's just give it 2 ingredients because this will make life a little bit easier when we come to working later on. And let's just put some dulce de leche in. Let's put 10% of that, and let's say 3% of that. Just making something up. So we now have a recipe in, and we've selected the ingredients and the percentages. So that really is the recipe form done for now. So we'll close it down, and we'll move on to the next thing. And the next thing is creating a control panel. So basically what we've done so far is we've created a number of tables and a number of forms, but they're all kind of separate forms, and I'll show you what I mean. If we open it up, we've got these 3 forms that we've created down here, but they are just separate forms that sit here, and we can open them like this and close them like that and open a next one. And really we're not going to be opening that one, that's just embedded in there. But this is all Chrome that comes from Access, and we'll get rid of all this eventually. So what we need is a kind of what we used to call a main menu. So we're going to call it a control panel in this case, and it's basically just going to be a series of controls on a form that will allow us to open other forms or search and blah blah blah. So we'll start off with what we've already got, and we'll just add controls to the new forms as we create them. So we can start with new ingredient because we have the new ingredient form. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a blank form like this. We'll go into design view, and without any attention whatsoever to design and layout, we're just going to stick in a button like this. Now we could use a macro, because essentially all we're going to be doing is when we click on this button, it's just going to open the new ingredient form for us. So we could use one of the sort of built-in macro things from the wizard here, but actually I'm not going to do that. And the reason why I'm not going to do that is because I'd rather have more control over what exactly happens when this button's pressed. Probably in this case, just opening the form will be fine. But in any case, I like to try and keep everything as flexible as possible for the future. So we're going to do it with a bit of VBA. So let's have a look at this and let's give it an on-click event handler in code. So what we want it to do is just to simply open the other form. So we can use do command open form, give it the name of the form, and yeah, actually we don't want to pass any parameters in this case. So actually that will do. What I do want to do though is rename that button. So let's go in here and let's call it new ingredient button. Let's just check that's updated in here, and it hasn't. So let's copy and paste that from there to here. We can delete that. We'll close this. We shall close this and save it as control panel form. We don't really need the form thing. Control panel will be fine. So we'll save that. And if we open up the control panel, press this button, our new ingredient form opens and we can close it and we go back to our control panel. Oh, starting to look like an application. Command 0 is probably not the best thing to put on there. So let's go back into design view, click on the button, go into format, caption, new ingredient will be fine. Let's have a look at it. Let's do that. Do that. Job done. So what else can we add to our new control panel? Well, let's have a look here. We've done the new ingredient button. We could add a new recipe button. So basically what we've got, if we look at it, is we've just created the control panel. We already had the new ingredient form, which we've created a button for. We have the recipe form, which we could also create a button for. So let's go back into the design view here. Let's just quickly create another button somewhere. That'll do. Cancel that. Let's give it a new recipe as the caption. And let's have a look at the click handler, or rather let's create a click handler. So we could just copy and paste the same code from the new ingredient and change this to whatever the name of the form is, which is recipe form, I think. Close that. Is it recipe form? It is indeed. So let's run it now and let's click the new recipe button. Oh, we've got an error. So let's end that. Let's go into the design view and let's just check our typing mistakes. Recipe form. No, is it not called recipe form? Ah, I spelled recipe wrong. Well, yeah, let's change it here for now. I might update that later. At least they match. So let's run it. Let's click new recipe and there we go. We've opened up the recipe form. However, you will notice that it hasn't actually opened up a new recipe. It's opened up, well, one of our existing recipes. The only, in fact, existing recipe. But it would actually open them all up if we had more than one and we could go between them. But that's not what we want. We probably want that later. But right now we want to specifically create a new recipe. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to add a little bit of extra code in to say when we click the new recipe button and open up the recipe form, we want it to display a blank recipe ready for us to enter. If you remember, we did something similar with the new ingredient form. Let's have a look at that. Let's have a look at the actual onload procedure for the form. And you can see that we put in a command to create a new record if it wasn't on a new record already. So we're going to do something similar, but this case it ran every single time because we only ever want to add new ingredients, we decided. What we'll need is something a bit conditional. So basically what will happen is if we're coming from this button here, then yeah, always show us a new blank record or a new empty recipe to complete. Otherwise, and at a later date, we'll put in a drop down of all the recipes so we can jump straight to a recipe. Otherwise, go to the recipe we've selected here. But for the minute, what we want to do is just, if we've pressed this button, open this with a new form. So let's close that. And let's close that. We don't need it. Go away. No. And let's have a look at the design view here. The event handler again for this button. As you can see, it's basically just opening the form. But there are some extra parameters that we can pass, i.e. we can send a little bit of data that's passed to the form that's being opened, which it can check, and depending on what bit of data that is, it can do different things. So in this case, we want to be able to say, well, we've clicked the new button, so create a new blank recipe record. The way we do that is, let's just stick some commas in here, and we'll see that we've got a whole bunch of additional parameters on this open form command. And the one we want is the last one, so we'll just stick a load of commas in until we get to the last one. And then we'll just pass this string. So basically what will happen is this new bit of text will be passed to the form that we're opening, the recipe form. And we can check on the recipe form to say, well, if that parameter says new, then display a blank record. So we'll close that down and we can save that form. Yep. Let's open up the old recipe form here. And let's have a look at the, okay, we don't have an onload event yet, so let's create one. So what we need to do then is when the form opens, and it calls this form load event handler, is we need to check if any data was passed from what was ever opening it, i.e. the button that we clicked. And yes, there was, but we can't assume there is. So we're going to need to do a little test to see if there is any data. So we'll say if not is null, which is kind of weird logic, but that's what we're going to do. me.openargs, then and then end if. So basically what we're saying is me.openargs contains any data that was passed when we opened the form. So what we're saying, if it isn't null, i.e. if this isn't empty, i.e. if it contains something, then do this, else just carry on and do nothing. So if it isn't empty, what we need to do is we need to check to see if it contains new. So again, we can just put if me open args equals new, then what do we need to do? Well, let's put in the end if first. Well, oops. Well, what we want to do is we want to create a new blank record and go to it. So that is run command, what is it? AC command records go to new. Right, so one other little thing though is we've noticed in the past that if we aren't on a new record already, this will error. Again, it's only going to happen when there are no records in the database, but well, we'll just put in a little catch-all anyway. So we'll say if the data passed to open the form was new and not me new record, then do that. So again, let's run through it briefly. This is going to happen every time the form loads, and it's going to say if there was some data passed, and if the data passed equals the bit of text called new, and we're not already showing a new record, then show a new record. That's exactly what we want it to do. So we'll close that. We'll say yes. We'll open the control panel. We'll click the new recipe button, and there you go. We've gone straight to a new record. Now we do still have some of the access bits and pieces in here, so we can scroll back to the other recipe we've created. But the important thing is if we close it again, we're always going to get a nice new blank record to enter a new recipe in when we click the new recipe button. So what we'll do next is we'll add a little drop down in here containing a list of all the recipes that we've got, so we can select a recipe and go straight to that recipe, so that rather than going to a new record, it would go to the specific record that we asked for. Recipe record, same thing, i.e. vanilla custard. So we'll do that tomorrow. Watching paint dry would be more interesting.